I must say, Road America and all you folks are really special to me because I've had a chance to race here with the Cobra and the Old Yeller, and I had a chance to race with Augie Pabst, and that was a memorable moment. And if I preface this, is that there was a time we were here, I think in '99, and Augie's such a gentleman and a hard racer, but I was having motor problems, engine problems, and so I was gridded way in the back, had to start in the back, but Augie came over and said, "Ernie, I will wait for you for a lap and a half. And if I don't see you, I'm going to continue racing." And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a small hill of beans. And this legendary Augie, which I got to meet before, but still, just that he said that to me, because it was to recreate July 31st, 1960. It was because Augie was in P1, position 1 pole, and Carroll Shelby was in P2. And so they took off and raced. Now I'll explain it because that's the end focus of this talk tonight, is about that historical moment. But, so I proceeded to run through the pack and caught him, and he and I ran around for laps exchanging leads and had a great time, and then went home. And then Monday morning, secretary says, "There's an Augie that wants to talk to you." I says, "Augie Pabst?" And so I was surprised, and it was really touching. So he says, "Ernie, I want to tell you that all of our friends and fans and people, every time we passed a certain turn in Road America, everybody stood up and cheered." And so it was like a chance to recreate a piece of history, and I'll tell you about that in a bit. So anyway, I'm here to talk about the journey how the Old Yeller got here in July of 1960. So let's see. This is Max Balchowski, and he was born in West Virginia, and he started out loving making bicycles, assembling bicycles and watch work, and then he would join the Army, and then he ended up in World War II, and he had to bail out of Europe. He was a tail gunner, and then they sent him on to Burma, and he was in the Burma campaign, and he loved fixing gauges and things like that. And after the war, he came back, and his brother was near Los Angeles, Southgate, at a auto shop. And so even though he had a GI Bill to do learning watch work, he hung out with the street racers and his brother that worked on cars and low hot rods. And so this is Max, and he's in front of the Old Yeller 2 and the Old Yeller 9 at Monterey. But he was so far advanced in his thinking, and there was the Scarab, and there was other specials, and before that, some of the people mentioned there's the Cunninghams, and this racetrack is just famous for having all those legendary people of the Cunningham and the Kimberleys and all the great drivers of the past, but Max was of the same breed. And this is a picture of young Augie, and this is Briggs Cunningham, and this is the day, and this is a picture going a little ahead, but this is Carroll Shelby, and this is Road America, and this is July, the weekend of July 31 in 1960. And the people ask me, what cars are you racing now? So let me just cover that real quickly. We have a Cobra that we race, and we're fortunate it has a Le Mans hardtop, and we had one of the 3 Le Mans aluminum hardtops that were made for Le Mans. That one came to America, and I raced that for about 20 some years, and finally I sold it and had a replica. But that's one of the cars. This is the hardtop, and it had a filler cap on the top. And this is a picture taken by Jay. And this is at Road America. And what turn is that? That is going to the front street. Yeah, right. And this is a 1948 Spurgeon Giovannini. It's a 1948 Land Speed Dry Lakes Hall of Fame car. We have that. And it has a Chevy 4. And then we run a Kilpatrick 1958 Porsche Speedster. And the unique thing about this, we're fortunate, Elaine and I have storied cars that have a story. This gentleman, General Kilpatrick, raced his car for 33 straight years in E-production at SCCA. And I took it over, I knew the family, so they asked me if I would take it over. I took it over and continued racing vintage. And so it's from 1964, it has not stopped racing. And he had 55,000 SCCA race miles in a lot. So it's quite exceptional. And this is last March, and we're in Australia, and this is at the Formula One. As you can see, those are the Formula One drivers. And the Old Yeller takes us everywhere, and we ride the coattails of the car, just like we ride the coattails of, like this morning I talked to Brian Redmond. He happened to be in Elkhart, and we saw him in England, but he's like Brian and Jim Hall and all the great people that are still with us, fortunately. We just ride the coattails. We're vintage racers, and we have to remember that. This is Rolex presentation. The car won the Phil Hill Award, and this is racing the car. And this is Pete Brock, and I'll tell you about him. But Pete Brock is the gentleman you all know that they honored at Goodwood, and he's the gentleman that designed the Shelby Daytona Coupe. And they took a Cobra and made the coupe, but very few people realize that he worked at Hollywood Motors, where Max had the shop. He was there during the build of the Old Yeller 2, and it was there that Paul O'Shea, that had a 300 SL going SCCA champion, that raced here at Road America, but it was Paul O'Shea that brought Carroll Shelby to Hollywood Motors, and that's where Pete Brock met, got hooked up, and then he went to Shelby American. And so there's a connection there, but that's Pete Brock recently. It's taken us around the world, and we have a chance to meet gentlemen like this, Tony Brooks and being a dentist. He was an oral surgeon, but he's in the period of Sterling Moss and the Van Walls. And this is a tribute to Dan Gurney at Goodwood, and we were invited to be part of this parade, which humbled us to our knees just to be there. So let me tell you how Max started. And he started with hot rods and street racing, and he always used a Buick. And why a Buick? Was it cheaper? Was it better? There's Chevys and Fords that were pretty trick, and even in the early days. But the Buick had more torque, and it could pull you more to the end of the block for street racing. But even in drag racing or whatever, the Buick could pull you quick. And so this car is the start of the whole story. And so he goes to Pebble Beach, and they had a sports car race, and they tried to ban him and say, well, no, the car it's not safe. There's so many things wrong with this car. And there was one race that was a famous national SCCA race, and the Cunninghams came, Kimberly came, Phil Hill with a Ferrari, and Ina, who is the wife, knew how to be a great mechanic. She could tune the carburetors, help with the transmission, and she could weld. And so she was amazing. And she actually changed the rules, and the women would love that, because in the 1954-55 period when they were racing, the SCCA regulation book said no women in the pits, and it was clear. And she goes up and they try to ban her. Finally, there was one race with the Old Yeller where there was a young man that was at the gate of the paddock, and Ina drives up the Old Yeller and says, no women. And she says, okay, I'll go home. Little did they realize that the organization for the races, and it was supposed to be non-professional, they were slipping $300 to Max to show up because he was an Americana crowd favorite. It was American against the Europeans, against the Ferraris and the Maseratis, and it was American. And so they had to run after her, change the rules, and allow her into the pits. But anyway, there was a time where they banned the car, and they said, no, you can't race. And they said, why? Give me a list. So they gave a list of 24 items. And I have the letter from Ina recalling that moment. And it was impossible. The hot rod didn't have fenders. And I think there's some little fenders on there now. So they made a list like 4 fenders, put louvers in the hood, whatever. And so they took that list and went to Hollywood Motors in LA on Hollywood Boulevard. And they called up their friends and they said, aluminum guy, I need 4 fenders, quick, help me, come over. And so they measured, made the fenders, did the louvers, did everything on that big, long, impossible list, and they show up for the race, and they had to allow them. And I have a photo of the first lap with the Cunninghams, and that hot rod's right in about 3rd place. And so that was a journey, and that was the start of it all. And this is that hot rod called the Buford Special. And the touching thing about that is that Max over the years was a good friend, and he started giving me things. And one of the first things he gave me was a chain stitched jacket, and it says Buford Special. And you know, I didn't realize that that hot rod is one of the top 20 hot rods they consider at the Hot Rod Museum that is the most significant, because Max put in a Buick and they went racing sports cars. And so from that, he went to Doretti. Does anybody know what a Doretti is? Have you heard of a Doretti? It's Swallow. And when they shipped it to America, there was a lady, Dean, and so they called it and named it a Doretti, but it's actually like a Triumph based. I have some information on that Doretti. And so he took a Doretti, which is a short wheelbase, and he stuffed a Buick in there, and he went racing. But he found that the short wheelbase made it a little difficult making it around turns, but he did race it at different races, but it gave him a taste of having a race car versus a hot rod. Because a hot rod, you know, a high boy sits too high and the brakes aren't good. And so that's how this whole thing started, and this is part of the journey. And so then it comes to Morganson Special. This is a Morganson Special, but it's called the Old Yeller 1. And it had it had Dodge truck fenders and a Plymouth motor, and it was built by Dick Morganson in Arizona, and the car in a ladies' race at Torrey Pines flipped, and the lady, it was a fatal crash, and so Max took it to his shop to hold it, and Dick said, well, just do the best you can with it. And so he said, well, let's go racing it again, and put a Buick motor into it. So this was, and it was in a movie, because Max eventually got connected to movies because he's famous, most famous, for doing the preparation work for Bullet with Steve McQueen. And he gets full credit for that, and that's how he got to know all the different people, and that's why the Cobra was in Love Bug, and the Old Yeller, if you want to see it, is in Viva Las Vegas with Elvis Presley. And so he was already starting to get connected with movies, and that's how ugly it was, but it had the right wheelbase and the CG was right. Everything was right. That this is Max and I, and there's grease under the fingernail. The Scarab, he broke the record. He broke the record in about spring of that year. And later, about 5 months later, Max, with that scruffy old yeller, broke the record. And he said, if I could break the record with this car, we can make a car. And so that's how it all started. And so Max laid out chalk lines and put a box and he sat on, and he set out a Buick motor, and that's how it all started. And then everybody asked me, boy, that car is pretty ugly. And I say, well, yeah, it's a yellow brick. And the aerodynamics of the time, the Ferraris and Maseratis had a very nice, beautiful, small oval opening. Well, I've got over there on that table of items, there's a full big blueprint of a Buick motor. He was talking to GM, and he kept saying, I could go lead the race, and I'll be ahead by a long ways because of the Buick. And then within 2 laps, it starts heating up. So it was a big deal, and I have a letter I just saw the other day again, and it said, help me and I'll work with you. They sent him blueprints, and they sent him crates, wood crates with a Buick motor. And I have also an invoice, kind of a sheet on it, and it says, industrial use only. So they were working. So in the build, he got the biggest radiator you can get. He got a Studebaker truck radiator. Big. What? To cool the motor, because it didn't matter about aerodynamics at that time. And so that's a reason for the big nose. But you can see the design, how it skirts around, because it's a very safe car. And the Lotus, as you know, Chapman, the drivers have a bar and the chassis right next to them. Max went around like a hot rod Nerf bar, if some of you guys know Nerf bars. And so it went around the driver, so you had a little room for safety. And he drilled 120 Jag upper A-arms with holes in the A-arm in a Studebaker lower, but Pontiac lower A-arm. But the A-arms were drilled for what? Crushability. Crushability at Indianapolis, as we all know, in the 1950s with Vukovich and all. If you hit the wall, you were gone. I mean, hit it hard, and there was no crushability. And so he was already thinking. And the other thing is that the whole front end was a series of washers. And if you had a Ferrari or a birdcage, you couldn't adjust it. He had a washer system. You could adjust caster, camber, everything. And Zeus fasteners. So the car has aircraft Zeus fasteners. Within 5 minutes, you can take off every panel and get to it. And he was advanced, but he played the game. This is Dan Gurney in 1960 in April, and he didn't have a ride at the big race. And so I'll compare some of the differences. The West Coast had big purses because it was LA Times. They had 100,000 people and 120,000 people, and this was 59, 60 period. That created a big purse, and Road America had a purse in 1960 at a guaranteed 15,000. So that's enough to encourage all of the European factory teams to send cars and send drivers also, as many of the drivers did. And so, just touching on the history of the Ola, here is Dan Gurney leading. So he didn't have a drive. Max said, drive the car. And so Dan's comment, which is really classic, is that's as easy to drive as a baby buggy. And that's all in the books. And that's what he said always. relating to this car. And so here he is, he gets a ride from Max. And he's leading the pack. He broke the track record. And the harmonic balancer broke. But here he is. Carroll Shelby is in second position here with the Birdcage Maserati at Riverside. And so here, this is the first rollout at Riverside of the old Yeller 2. And you can see, if you look around, you might see Chuck Day. And what it is at the track testing on the same day was a Scarab Formula One. And those that know history know it was a front engine Formula One that came too late, and everything was rear engine at that time, or most were rear engine. So here's Carroll Shelby at a second race at Santa Barbara. And this is the preparation to Road America. This is a great shot. They were getting ready. Max was approached by Carroll Shelby, and he says, look, there's a big person, Road America. So I'll split the prize money, and let's go racing at Road America. And so they agreed, and this is a shot getting ready to leave Hollywood Motors in July of 1960. And on the way, you know, Max, all through the years, he kind of played a game. He played a game with the reporters, and he told me this over and over, but he would do tricks like the reporter says, I'll come back in an hour. So in an hour, they came back, and he would put brand new plugs, spark plugs, in the trash can. And the reporter would come and said, Max, how you doing? Great. And Max would say, hey, the Maserati team, they just took the plugs out. They only used it one race. Can you go get the plugs? And they dig out the plugs, brand new plugs, and the reporter's looking, and he's installing the plugs while he's getting interviewed. But he played these games. But he had a really safe car with building a car. All of his welds were x-rayed by a doctor, Doc from Idaho. He had an engineer from Jet Propulsion that did all the chassis work, designed stressing to make it extra safe. And it all came back to bite him once at Pomona in about 62, where one of Old Yeller 4 went into the crowd, and they only had snow fencing, which you know is not going to hold up anything. And some people had fatally died, and they blamed the car, and they didn't realize that he was checking every weld, and he was checking more than other people. But he was playing the game, so it came back to bite him a little bit. So anyway, here they are, Hollywood Motors, and they're getting ready to come to Road America. He never had a trailer, and they loved to drive to the races, major races. So on that trip, trailering, they took the car off in Iowa, and Billy Krause was coming with his D-Jag with a Chevy, and they're all caravanning. They took the car off, and they drove the rest of the way to Road America, and it also came back to bite him because the transmission eventually broke. So here it is. Here's Augie. This is July 31, 1960. P1, Augie Paps. P2, Carroll Shelby. And if you read the comments, they're pretty cool. And as Augie said, look who's on the pole. So I love that. I love that picture. And so this was like the West Coast, and it was a gathering of everybody. And the East came to Road America, and the West came to Road America. And it was the most incredible collection of cars of the day. There were everything from the smaller leaders, like the RSK. There was Roger Penske, and Roger Ward was in a RSK. But the big guys, there was a Lister that Jim Hall had raced, and Camarade race team, the Maserati team, flew the car that was at Le Mans with a long plexiglass, and Jeffords was in that tall. They had to cut the tubes because he was so tall, 6'2", to fit in the car. He was a crowd favorite. And they had everything there to race. And so there was a hall and just behind, and yeah, Katsuki was behind that. So it was difficult. It would fire up, and I think the starter was trying to delay as long as he could. Finally, he had to throw the flag to start, and just then the Scarab fired up. Augie just broke the track record. He had broken the track record in June, racing against Dick Thompson in a Corvette, but it was 2:44, and he broke the record, and here he is, stumbling, and finally they got it fired up and they took off. And this is the start of the race. So Carroll Shelby jumps out into the lead, and this is really important because I think the experience alone helped his thinking for the future, because he jumped out, and within less than 10 laps he was already lapping the field. And it was a 200-miler, 50 laps, and he was leading by 51 seconds over everybody. And this is the best Europe had to offer, and he was leading. And 51 seconds, and later that kind of memory stuck with him, and he thought about American motor with a lightweight, and that's where he called up AC and said, give me a body and chassis and you keep the motor. And that's a Cobra. And so if he could run away with just a car like this, he could build his own also. So anyway, by lap 31, transmission broke. And here he is racing. And so Augie Paps jumps in the lead. And so he jumped in the lead, and he went for another 8 laps, and he broke. And so we have the Le Mans long tail, and it had a long plexiglass screen, and it's to comply with the FIA requirements in Europe. But Jeffords is in this car, cruising along, and he jumps in the lead. But this car, there was other bird cages that were really competitive in the day, and it ended up the top 3 cars were birdcage Maseratis at the end. And so these are the kind of cars, everything. There was Skip Hudson with a Ferrari, and like I said, Roger Ward, Roger Penske, and Jim Hall. And this is, you know, the Scarab, and here's another picture at the start. And Carroll Shelby, he had his famous driver's outfit, and there was somebody here that made the comment. Carroll always wore Oshkosh, what do you call it, overalls?
Bagash.
Yeah. Somebody said, hey, you should wear one, you could wear it over your driver's suit, and you'd be like Carroll Shelby. So you can see he's got his Oshkosh on. Oh, and so this is a gentleman that gave me, got prints of all of those pictures, historic pictures of that weekend. And it's Ray Bolt. And you can see this years ago, he came up to me at a Leica and talked to me, and really friendly. We had a friendship. But that's what's neat, is that there's other races that we've raced and had a great time, but I have this affinity because this gentleman gave me photographs of that historic moment. And this is a picture of him. And then these are some of his pictures that was in a booklet, as you can see. They're just great pictures of the cars of the period. And that's Ray Bolt. And here's Max again. And so, again, the winner, Jeffords, won 36 $100 or more for the purse. And Carroll Shelby, with the number of laps, they got $50 a lap if you won the lap. And so he got $1,600. And so the car broke, the transmission broke. And this is that picture of Augie and I racing in '99 where we're going nose to tail together. And for me, you know, we've been fortunate to race in New Zealand and Australia, you know, New Zealand, Australia, and England. But this is a memorable moment because it was, for the fans and for us, it was really just such an emotional moment to recreate what happened in 1960. And this is Carroll Shelby with Bob Bondurant, and this is Ina working on the car. And people ask who else drove the car. Carroll twice, Dan twice, but there was Billy Krause, and he came here with a D-Jag and a Chevy. He is the first Cobra driver for Carroll Shelby, but he raced the Old Yeller. And there was Bobby Drake. He was the first Birdcage Maserati driver in America. He raced the Old Yeller. He was a friend. And Paul O'Shea raced. And so we had a whole list of people, but Max wanted to build other cars. And so he knew that everybody wanted a chance, so it would help him if he built more cars, which he did. And so here's Ina, just incredible lady. And they have Hot Rod magazines from the 50s, and it shows a picture of her working on a transmission and not just polishing cars or changing plugs. I mean, major stuff. So she would call the racetracks. This is later. But she would call the racetracks and say, excuse me, if they had a race. How long is your front straight? Do you have elevation? How many right-hand turns? How many left-hand turns? And the guy would say, lady, what are you asking these questions for? And she says, I'm setting up the car. So she was thinking of changing the suspension, the straight for the quick change rear end. She was going to change the gears. So she was full on active. And not only that, one time she had a stopwatch. She had all the top 3-4 competitors. She had lap charts that were incredible. And one time there was a race at Riverside, and there was a question between second and third. And the organizers and people in control said, are you willing to accept what Ina says? And so they go to Ina. No, he's second and he's third. And that's how important she was in racing. And so that car, that picture, after 1960, it came to Chuck Baldwin, just got out of law school here, and he raced it at Road America and Meadowdale, right? That's close by, another track at Meadowdale. And this is how it ended, where Carol always likes to tell the story. And the caption here is, which is a quote, Max, where in the hell did you get that transmission? And Max answers, a junkyard, where do you think? And so here he is trying to explain his way out. But that weekend, it was known that Ina was working on the car and working on the transmission. And Max was out with his friends, and she was trying to get the car finished for the race. So that's a true story too. And the touching moment is when I came here, the marshals had given me the Dave Palmer Award, and some people were here, our friends here, and it was a sportsmanship award, and I was touched and moved, and this is a group, and we had just done Goodwood, and Goodwood had the hill climb, and there was on Saturday afternoon there was a fatal accident, and a fellow from Australia with a Lotus went to the finish line and crashed into the gantry and took out the driver got killed and the marshal got killed, and one got fatally injured. And I promised them that I would write a tribute to them. And here we're racing, and we forget about the marshals sometimes, but Elaine and I, every time we go, like in England, we hand out 3 trophies with flaggers on it, and it says, "Angel under our wings," in appreciation. And sometimes we drive, and some of you are going to be driving, but we forget about the marshals, and we make an effort to thank them. But I said I would write a tribute. I put electrical tape on my arm that weekend at Goodwood, and I shook hands with every marshal I could. And I wrote a tribute, and it's a tribute to a fallen marshal. And I'd like to end by reciting that to you, if I could. And it goes like this. It's a tribute to a fallen marshal. If I could, I would go to my morning briefing, for I understood my responsibility of the day to make sure there was safety for the drivers and fans. If I could, I would put on my orange BAR suit once again, for that suit stood for the legacy and history of our organization to serve and provide safety for others. If I could, I would go to my assigned station, and I would walk that section of the track to make sure it was absolutely safe for the day and during the day. If I could, I would share lunch with my fellow marshals, and we understood that we would serve regardless of the weather, whether rain or cold, we would serve. If I could, I would go to my tracks I loved. I'd go to Donington, I'd go to Le Mans, I would go to Goodwood, I would go to Silverstone, for I love the tracks as much as the drivers themselves. If I could, I would hear the sounds, and I love the Maserati and the Ferraris and everything else that race, because I love cars just as much as the drivers and owners. If I could, I would salute back at the end of a race to each driver passing by. And if I got a salute back, I would know it was a job well done as well. If I could, I'd raise the checkered flag high in the sky. Little did I realize that the checkered flag, unfurled high in the sky, would touch the face of God, and He was flagging me home as well. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
With a UFVA, how did you have to deal, first of all, were there specific weight requirements, minimums or maximums, and how did you have to deal with that with an American V8 that was made of cast iron versus some of the Europeans that were smaller engines and probably had a lot of caliber?
That's a good question, and I think we have a great time because people walk by and they see Buick and go, "Oh my God, what is this?" And so there was not a weight problem. And they asked Max, "Why did you pick up Buick?" And he always said it's cheaper. But there wasn't that. But not many other cars had 6.6 liters. I mean, big, mega horsepower. But it had the grunt. I mean, it could run fast and hard. And so many times, that's a good question because Max, the torque was so good, Max many times would never shift down to second. He'd always be in third and fourth. And Bob Bondurant, that you saw the picture, he raced at Vacaville, and Max said, you go out in second, and don't worry, by the first turn, and he already measured the turn, the distance for the first turn, he says, you go out in second, and you'll be there. And Bob Bondurant, who has a driving school and raced internationally, he said he couldn't believe it. Max was right. He just put it in second and he waited, and by the time they got to the first corner, he was leading. So that's why he picked a Buick, and there was no weight restrictions. But Buicks are hard to do a race motor. A lot of them, it's called a nail head because the valves are so small, pistons are so giant. That's a good question. Any questions? Must have covered it. Great. Thanks. I really, honestly, just being here, I have such great respect for this track. And here I have some special friends that came, and it's a tribute to Howie and Jay. They're people that have inspired me, and the reason I did not cancel and I came because it's a tribute to Howie and Jay and all of you people, and I hope you enjoyed it, but believe me, I do respect coming. Thank you.